I'm so mad because I recorded this whole spiel and my microphone was not picking up any of it. So this is my attempt to re-record everything that I was saying. Oh god. I guess now it's gonna be a lot easier for me to be more succinct, but and more coherent. But what prompted the original video, I guess, was actually something that I had seen that I had read on Tumblr about I don't know, like an hour ago or something. But it sparked the I guess pondering of the reasons why I write and the reasons I used to have for writing. And I say that because some of the things that I had read in that post on Tumblr would have really resonated with who I was when I was younger, when I, was still kind of a baby poet or what have you. This was probably around like when I first started writing, which was writing poetry specifically, which was around like age 12 till I was maybe like 17 or 18. Honestly, you could argue even, after that, because my reasons for writing now I didn't come to develop until fairly recently, to be honest, within maybe like the last 2 years. But what was said in that post and the, I guess, views of OP when it comes to their writing was a belief that I had, or a view that I had of my own writing when I was younger. And this isn't to criticize OP or anything, but as I am now, I find that way of thinking and those reasons for writing are very limited to just in general, very limited. I had said this in a different video, but to me, to write poetry, to be a poet, it's to leave evidence that one has lived. To be a poet is indistinguishable and tangled with being human. Did I say that right? Oh gosh. To be a poet is indistinguishable to me from being human. To write is to leave evidence of living. To write is to leave evidence of being human. And to be human. Oh, 1 second. As I was saying, to be a poet is to be human, and to write is to live, or at the very least, to leave evidence of living. And what OP had said in their post was, like I'd said, a belief that I had about my own writing when I was much younger. That being that poetry and writing in general was a way for me to process and to cope with, big feelings, big, heavy feelings, and to cope with events of the past. And there was a point in time where I believed that my best work came from those periods of time, or those moments where I was overcome with big, heavy emotion, where I was anguishing and in sorrow and in pain. And this isn't to say that to write poetry about those things isn't valid, because even now I still write about stuff like that. I still use poetry and writing in general as a way of processing through events of the past, coping with emotions, etc. But I think that in limiting yourself in that way, it's not to say that like I'm accusing OP or anyone who writes this way of not acknowledging the how do I phrase this? Of not acknowledging all the other ways of all the other extents of the human experience. But in a way, I do feel like it's not giving those other aspects of living the credit that they just as equally deserve as emotions like pain and sorrow and anguish. The point that I was trying to make and did end up making in the video that I just recorded that didn't have the audio was that there are so many writers on Tumblr that are just phenomenal writers. But how do I... Gosh. There are so many phenomenal writers on Tumblr. And as selfish as it is to say, I want to see these writers write about more than just their own suffering. That isn't to... I'm not trying to call their suffering invalid or anything. I don't want to try to put down anyone's suffering by any means, but when you make, at least in my opinion, when you make your writing only about those things, about your own suffering, I really do feel like it blinds you to how much value there is in writing about other emotions, I guess, or rather writing about things that inspire emotions other than sorrow, anguish, and pain. Like I had said, I had once believed that my best work came from those types of emotions, from anguish, sorrow, and pain. But I'm at a point now where actually my best work comes from when I feel my heart swell, when I feel my chest is full, when there is warmth and light and all of those good things, right? But it's not so much those particular feelings. It's more the things that inspire those feelings. God, I hope I'm not putting anyone down right now. I feel like I'm treading kind of a fine line here, because I do 100% believe that to use poetry as a form of coping and a form of processing is valid. Excuse me. And I don't know, maybe it's just, differences in the way I see the world versus how someone else sees the world. Differences in the way that I see the human experience versus differences in the way that someone else might view the human experience. I think what it is at the end of the day is that there is just as much reason to write about joy and love and awe and wonder as there is to write about anguish and pain and sorrow and darkness. And for me personally, the reason why I love poetry so much is the fact that I am able to essentially live someone else's human experience vicariously through what they write. And I think my desire for a lot of these writers is to be able to see them experience the full extent of being human. Excuse me. Not to say that, these writers don't. But again, to me, to write poetry is to live, or at least to leave evidence of living. And I don't know, there are just some writers who I want to see what happiness looks like in their style, if that makes sense. I want to see some of these writers happy, because I want to see what they do with that happiness, what they write with that happiness. I guess, excuse me, God, my throat. While I believe that some of these writers are exceptional and that their work is beautiful, even as they write maybe only exclusively about their own anguish, I just can't help but wonder what their work would look like if they okay, how do I phrase this without potentially upsetting someone? I just can only imagine how beautiful their work will be, or would be, if they drew inspiration from feelings like fullness of the heart, or warmth, or love, or joy, or awe and wonder. And I say that in the most selfish way possible. I want to see these writers write about happiness, about their happiness. Because I want them to be happy. I feel like in the time between, when I was younger, fully believing that I wouldn't be able to write anything good if I wasn't suffering for it. Compared to now, where I feel fulfilled and most like myself when I write about or write from that feeling of fullness in my chest. I think what I really want at the end of the day is for people to know that feeling. But yeah. If there is anything that I may request of whoever is watching and of anyone who feels like their sole purpose in writing is to process their anguish or to cope with it, I just ask that you consider what sort of things fill or evoke that sense of fullness in your heart and in your chest. Or maybe it's elsewhere in your body. For me, it's right here. But I just ask that you consider what inspires those feelings. And I just ask that you sit with them. While I ultimately would love to see writing inspired from those feelings of fullness, I don't ask that of any of you now, just because I know that it's not like you can, flip a switch and suddenly you're able to feel like your best work comes from anything other than your own sorrow. I just ask that you think about it, consider it, maybe even seek that feeling out. See where it takes you. Ultimately, I don't want anyone to box themselves into whatever perceptions or ideas that they have formed of themselves. There was a time where I thought that I would never be happy, where I would never want to keep living my life. And, here we are now, wanting to live more than I have ever before. Things can change, and it might not seem like it right now, but no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. God, there is no telling what will come tomorrow and the next day and the day after and a week from now and a month from now, a year from now, 5, 10, 30 years from now. But, yeah. I wish everyone watching the experience of fullness and almost as if your heart is just radiating out. I hope you find love in everything, joy in everything. My dogs are at my door. And I hope you find, or I hope that you come to maybe see the reason in writing about more than just your pain. The value, I should say, rather than reason. I hope that you see the value in writing about your joy, in your happiness, in your contentment. I hope you don't just limit yourself to opening and reopening wounds, hoping that they'll get better. I hope you, instead of always looking back in your writing to try to close the door behind you, I hope that you can use your writing to forge a new path forward for yourself. But yeah, it was a bit heavier than the recording that I had done before this, but I hope to see the full extent of the human experience in your writing. I want to see you happy.